Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Mark with exoticcarplayplace. And so a very loyal subscriber named Paul asked the question, I am contemplating buying a 2020 Toyota Supra. What are your thoughts? I fear that BMW parts will cause problems down the road. Well, Paul, let's get into it. When Toyota brought the latest Supra out called the A90, it was more or less a kissing cousin of the BMW Z4. Now the new A90 is very voluptuous, full of shapes and all kinds of different curves, and it's very attractive, definitely polarizing. And when it first came out, it featured BMW's B48 3-liter straight-six engine with a single turbo that happened to be twin scroll. These cars produced about 335 horsepower and would go consistently at the racetrack from 0 to 60 in about 3.9 seconds. Now this all sounds very delicious because it also had an amazing exhaust note with snap, crackles, and pops, and it punched through the air with a quarter-mile time of about 12.8 seconds. So there's no question the car was quick, fun, sounded great, and with a Toyota badge on it, you had to believe it was somewhat dependable. Now, Paul, I know you're asking the question about how reliable is it really? Well, I have to believe that the famous or infamous automotive car YouTube channel called Scotty Kilmer, who is a strong advocate for reliable driving and consistently refers to BMWs as endless money pits, decided to go and promote a new Toyota Supra for himself on his own channel. So what do I think about it? Well, we'll get to that in a moment, and I'll also talk about some of the issues that these cars have in a moment. But let's talk about a few of the specifications for the latest model in 2021 first of all. Now, realizing, of course, there's a couple of different variations in the new 2021 model. You've got a 4-cylinder engine version now, which is based on BMW's B48 engine, which produces about 255 horsepower and provides a slightly better balance because the weight distribution is slightly less on the front end. But that's not the engine you want. In my opinion, you want to get the Turbo 6. Now, it's actually up this year in 2021, up 47 horsepower, which gives it a significant power advantage. Although, with that said, the torque curve has moved up the rev range as well, and to its own detriment has caused some performance issues. Now, what have they done differently for 21? Well, first of all, the exhaust system is slightly retuned. They've got the dual branch exhaust with 6 individual ports now, which allows for better breathing. BMW has also changed the static compression ratio. Being that it's a turbocharged car, you can't run an extremely high compression ratio, but they've reduced it even further for the sake of tuning and durability. So they've gone from 11 to 1 from the 2020 model down to a 10.2 to 1 compression ratio, which allows you a little bit increased boost performance, which again produces the ultimate high end, and that's more tunable rather than running a higher static compression ratio, which reduces your capability for additional boost. Now, as a result, they were able to attain 382 horsepower up from the 335, and the 2020 model year also produces much better exhaust sounds. They've tuned that out with this newer model, which is a sad state of affairs, but they've also done that with the Jaguar F-Type. If you look at a 2018 or 19, it has better sounds than the brand new 21 model, as they've dialed back some of the burbles and pops and snaps and crackles, sadly enough. Now, sadly, the new car is slower to 60 miles per hour to the tune of about 4 seconds versus 3.9 from the previous car, but the 21 model punches out as a quarter-mile time of 12.3 seconds versus the 12.8 on the 2020 model. But it's hardly noticeable by the seat of the pants, and quite frankly, it's not all about straight line performance. I mean, a Supra's never been a point and squirt car. It also has handling and brakes to consider. But that's where 2020's also stepped that up as well. They've improved things on the handling department. They've added strut tower braces, revised adaptive dampers, and actually changed out the bump stops. The stability control, revised steering, and the differential tuning has all been modified as well in the newer version, which does go a long way to actually help the way it handles and drives. So the newest car is actually better in a lot of ways in a technical way. But regardless, when you remove all traction control aids, you'll still find that is a hairy, twitchy little car, regardless of how you drive it, and regardless of which model you choose, the 20 or the 21 model years. As I said, this is basically a BMW drivetrain, and as a result, I wouldn't expect anything different because it's utilizing the same 8-speed ZF automatic transmission, which, by the way, Paul and everyone else, it's a very, very bulletproof tranny, and it always seems to know which gear to be in. I've actually got a very similar transmission in my Jaguar F-Type, and it really does a great job of knowing the gear to be in, when to shift, when not to shift. It's actually a great gearbox. Sadly, you cannot get a manual tranny in the 6-cylinder Supra at this time. Maybe eventually down the road, but time will tell. But I'm sure, Paul, you and many other viewers out there already know a lot of these statistics. I'm just spouting off stats and quotes, and I've driven these cars, and I can really attest that the cars have enough power to scare you on occasion, but they are still very balanced, well-designed car. After all, they're coming from BMW, which is the ultimate driving machine. Well, now I probably don't need to babble on about statistics. There's a million YouTubers out there that have already talked about that to the nth degree on the new Supra. These cars are great. They're awesome performance. I would buy one myself. It's just I've just bought another car. To be honest, they're a great machine. They drive well, they sound great, and they have all the performance you could possibly need. But you're not here to hear the babbling. You're here to learn about reliability and how long these cars are going to last. And I'm here to tell you this B48 engine that's tucked under the hood, that's the 3-liter turbo inline 6 with 1 turbo, not 2, it's 1, and it's called a twin scroll. And this engine is actually a closed deck design, so you can almost kiss away the idea of blown head gasket. But with that said, there are some potential pitfalls and some issues that are already starting to rear their ugly heads. One thing that's been noted recently with some of the B58s, at least in the BMW worlds, and I know they will transfer through to the Supra, at least in my opinion, is coolant loss. Now, coolant loss is nothing new in the BMW world. Usually they leak it more often than burn it, but nonetheless, coolant loss is a potential issue. People have noted having to add coolant at 5 or 10,000 kilometers to top it up. It shouldn't be going anywhere. There's no such thing as natural coolant loss. So if there is a loss in excess of that, then I would suggest you possibly get it looked at. Another issue that you might find with B58s with some miles on them are the infamous valve cover gaskets that BMWs are known for. Sadly enough, there could be issues there. As well, you might find issues with the oil filter housing gasket, as you find in a lot of BMWs. With time, you'll start to weep oil around there. As well as there's also the infamous oil filter disintegration problem. But that really isn't so much the car as the issue of servicing. Now, BMW traditionally offers some very high extended service intervals, and that all translates down to the Toyota Supra. I would suggest doing more frequent oil changes and that problem more or less disappears. But that is a thing. And Vanos solenoids, that's another potential. Those have already been noted as issues creeping in from time to time in the new Supra, as well as the BMW with the B58 engine associated with it. And the Vanos is basically your variable valve timing. If your Vanos stops working, you'll likely get an engine code, but more likely you'll start getting running issues, sloppiness out of the hole, or possibly it just doesn't have the breathing at the top end of the rev range. You'll notice pretty quickly if the performance just isn't there anymore, and likely it has to do with your Vanos solenoids. Now, there's another thing that I believe, it hasn't been shown or proven yet, but the B48 engine, which is the 4-cylinder version that you find in the 4-cylinder Supra, as well as you'll find it in a lot of the 4-cylinder BMWs. Now, it's basically the 30 series in the BMW land. The problem with that now, it's called the B48, and there's been proof now, there's some recalls for the balance shaft bearing, which apparently has been known to let go. If it fails, and there's a good possibility of it due to construction techniques and pure design issue, that usually means a catastrophic engine failure. Sadly enough, because the B48 is also a modular engine from the same family, it's a distant cousin from the B58, which is the 6-cylinder version. They're both modular. Now, I can't read the future, but if I was a betting man, I would think that we're likely going to see some issues with the balance shaft bearing as well in the 6-cylinder versions of this. So regardless, the 4-cylinder Supra, you may have that issue that carries through from the BMW world and possibly the 6-cylinder as well. Either way, any car can fail. They're all mechanical by their very nature. I wouldn't let that necessarily stop me, but I would certainly go in there with eyes wide open and try to understand what the potential pitfalls of these cars are. Now, I might as well share with you a few of the recalls that have popped up already, kind of almost in the BMW tradition, sadly enough. Not so much Toyotas. If you look at almost any other Toyota model on the market, there are very, very few recalls, but this Supra actually has a few right out of the box. The car's only 2 years old, and you can actually find there was a few cars, I think it was to the tune of about 7, that were identified with bad seatbelt mounting welds that potentially could be an impact or an issue. In the event of a collision, they could rip right out of the floorboards, and of course are not going to hold you in. Now, BMW, or essentially Toyota, is taking ownership and saying that if your car is inspected and having poor welds, they may in fact just replace your car with a brand new one. Either way, there was a very, very small number of cars that seemed to be associated with that issue. Another problem was there was about 177 Supras, and a pile more BMWs, because it's essentially the same car, that had potentially faulty headlight control units. Now, could you imagine driving down a twisty mountain road and all of a sudden at night, you lose your vision, you lose your lights, you're doing 60 miles an hour on some twisties in the mountain canyons in Southern California, and all of a sudden you lose total visibility? That could be catastrophic, I'm not gonna lie. But that has been a known issue, and they will fix that, but it was a recall. Let's also not forget the backup cameras were another faulty component within these cars. And there was also a fuel tank issue, where the two halves of the tank, the welds down the middle weren't completely done properly, and there was a high potential for fuel leak. If that happened, of course, lo and behold, the car could explode or burn to the ground. Now, while the probability was extremely low, there was a risk and there was a recall associated with that. So beware of that one as well. So at the end of the day, would I buy one? Absolutely, I would buy a Toyota Supra, specifically the 6-cylinder version. And would I be worried about the reliability issues? Well, not really, because the B48 is an extension of the older turbo 6-cylinder that was also single turbo twin scroll by BMW. It was called the N55, and that was a vastly improved engine from the engine before, which was the N54, which that was a disaster waiting to happen. But this engine is proving to be fairly solid. It's just stay on top of the maintenance. Be sure to do a little more frequent oil services. Don't neglect the coolant issues. If you've got hoses or you've got a coolant leak, or possibly say a water pump or a thermostat or a gasket of some type, deal with it right away. If you're going in to change one hose for the cooling system, maybe do the whole cluster of hoses around it. Don't just do one piece at a time, because that's historically where you'll run into problems. Make sure you do a decent level of maintenance on it. Again, watch out at that 60, 70, 80,000 mile range. That's where you're gonna start seeing some of these leaks. But take care of it, stay on top of it, and honestly, you will have one of the most legendary cars and very tunable cars. There's YouTubers out there now putting down over 1,000 horsepower with one of these engines. Because of the closed deck design, it can tolerate a whole heap load of boost. So they're great engines overall. They perform well. Let's face it, Toyota put some faith in BMW to ensure that they have the right car. So hope that answers your questions, everybody. Hope to see you real soon, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Bye-bye.